Welcome to the Morgan Mystery. London's mornings were always veiled in fog, but for Alfred Morgan, that mist wasn't just weather. It was the thin veil between truth and lies. People called him a detective, but Alfred would always smile and say, "A detective hunts criminals. I only hunt the truth. I am not detective. I am truth seeker." Alfred Morgan was an unusual man. He carried no badge, owed allegiance to no agency. Yet his eyes, sharp and searching, could read the secrets written deep within a person's soul. His mind was ruled by logic, but his heart still belonged to humanity. Always by his side was Charles Bennet, a writer and his closest friend. To Charles, Alfred wasn't merely a man, he was a living riddle. While Alfred sought the truth behind every mystery, Charles turned those journeys into stories. Together they wandered through the foggy streets of London and the dark corridors of forgotten manors. One searching for truth, the other preserving it in words, a truth seeker and a storyteller. One quest, one legend. We'll keep bringing you new, thrilling, and mystery-filled adventures of Alfred Morgan. Stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat every single time. If you enjoyed the story, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your reviews always inspire us to try something new and keep moving forward. Let's begin today's story. The Deadly Diamond. Detective Alfred Morgan sat in his study, his legs propped up on the edge of the mahogany table, idly tapping his foot against the polished surface. A folded copy of the London Chronicle rested open on his lap. Outside, a steady drizzle veiled the streets, and the faint murmur of raindrops against the windowpane filled the room with a melancholy rhythm. It had been raining for days, 4 to be precise, and Alfred and his companion, Charles Bennet, had spent each one in much the same way. Indoors, listless, and without purpose, the monotony was beginning to wear on them both. Alfred's constant movement did not break his concentration. His sharp gray eyes remained fixed on the newspaper columns. Charles, seated nearby with a cigarette in hand, exhaled slow curls of smoke into the damp air. For a long while, neither of them spoke. At last, Charles broke the silence, simply to pass the time. "Anything interesting in the news this morning?" he asked. Without looking up, Alfred replied evenly, "Something rather serious, actually. 2 criminals have been released." Charles's eyes brightened slightly. "Oh, who are they?" "One," Alfred said dryly, "is the fallen woman, apparently showing again in a few picture houses. The other is Raymond Nash, released from Wandsworth Prison. The news is 10 days old, mind you, and the Chronicle saw fit to print it only today." He tossed the paper aside in mild irritation and stood up, stretching his legs. Charles watched him, amused. "You sound disappointed," he said. "I am," Alfred admitted with a faint frown. "It's an injustice to the profession of journalism that on such a dreary, rain-soaked day, there isn't even a scrap of proper news to stir the blood." After a moment, Charles asked, "Who is this Raymond Nash?" Alfred began pacing the room, hands in his pockets. He paused by the window, gazing out at the wet, glistening street below. "Nash," he said slowly, "is hardly an unknown name. A few years ago, it was splashed across every front page in London." "You still haven't answered my question," Charles said with mock impatience. "Who exactly is he?" Alfred turned, a faint glimmer of respect in his eyes. "He's a thief, not a petty crook, but a jewel thief of rare intelligence and daring, clever, audacious, almost artistic in his methods." He sighed, lighting a cigarette with deliberate care. "They don't make criminals like him anymore." Charles gave a wry smile. "A tragedy for England, no doubt. But tell me, why was his name printed in such large letters?" "Because after years of eluding capture, he was finally caught and tried," Alfred replied, settling back into his chair. The faint flicker of nostalgia crossed his face. "That was nearly 10 years ago, long before I met you." Charles noticed how Alfred's tone, which had started casually, now carried a note of growing animation. The detective's mind was returning to old territory, to a mystery that still lingered unsolved. Realizing that a good story was about to unfold, Charles leaned forward eagerly. "Go on then," he said. "Let's have it. It's better than sitting here listening to the rain." Alfred smiled faintly. "It isn't quite a story," he said. "More a puzzle that's never left me. The police did their work thoroughly, even achieved partial success, but they never recovered the one thing that truly mattered." Charles frowned. "And what was that?" Alfred's eyes gleamed as he replied, "A diamond, the most extraordinary I've ever heard of. A deep blue gem that seemed to glow red under lamplight. They called it the blood sapphire." He leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. That year, London was gripped by a sudden wave of jewel thefts. One day it was Hargreaves and Sons, the next Dawson and Company. Within a fortnight, 5 of the largest jewelers in the city had been robbed, each crime more daring than the last. The total losses were estimated at tens of thousands of pounds. He paused to draw on his cigarette. The police launched a full investigation, but the thief stayed one step ahead every time the entire city's jewelers were in a state of panic. Then at last, Raymond Nash was caught, but the blood sapphire was never found. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and ceaseless. Inside, the detective's voice grew quieter, as though speaking more to himself than to his friend. "To this day," Alfred murmured, "no one knows what became of that diamond, and I've often wondered, was Raymond Nash truly the thief, or merely the pawn in someone else's game?" The room fell silent again, except for the rain. The mystery of the deadly diamond had begun to stir once more in Alfred Morgan's restless mind. Alfred leaned back in his chair, the glow of his cigarette dimming as he continued his tale. "Then came the most daring of the robberies," he said. "It took place at Lord Reginald Sinclair's country estate in Surrey. I hardly need to tell you who Lord Sinclair was. There are few Englishmen unfamiliar with his name. He was as wealthy as he was charitable. One of the last true gentlemen of the old order. His collection of precious stones was renowned throughout the country." Charles nodded, intrigued. "His jewels," Alfred went on, "were displayed in a glass cabinet in the second-floor gallery of his manor. The room was guarded day and night, 2 men on shift at all hours, yet one foggy night there was a break-in. The guards were found unconscious at their posts, and several of the rarest stones were missing." Alfred paused to draw on his cigarette before continuing, his tone more deliberate now. "Among the collection was a blue diamond, Lord Sinclair's most prized possession. He called it the blood sapphire. He believed it brought him extraordinary luck. He wore it on a ring, but recently the setting had come loose. He'd placed it in the gallery for safekeeping, intending to have it reset the following week. That was the night it vanished." Charles raised his eyebrows. "So the blue diamond, the same one you mentioned before, was stolen then?" "Exactly," said Alfred. "You may not know much about diamonds, Charles, but blue diamonds are among the rarest and most valuable in existence. Their worth isn't merely measured by weight or clarity. In Europe, and especially here in England, they've long been surrounded by superstition. The ancients believed them to be ruled by the planet Saturn, bringers of either immense fortune or utter ruin." He smiled faintly, as if amused by his own words. "It's said that if a blue diamond suits its wearer, it brings prosperity beyond measure. But if it does not, misfortune follows without mercy. I'm not a superstitious man, as you know, but I've seen enough curious coincidences surrounding that stone to keep an open mind." Charles flicked the ash from his cigarette. "And what did Lord Sinclair do when he discovered the theft?" "He was beside himself," Alfred replied. "Though thousands of pounds worth of gems had been taken, it was the blue diamond alone that he truly mourned. He offered a handsome reward to anyone who could recover it. No questions asked. The Metropolitan Police launched a full-scale investigation. They even brought in Inspector Norman Briggs, one of their most capable detectives at the time." "Was he successful?" Alfred nodded slowly. "Within a week, he traced the theft back to a man named Raymond Nash. Yes, the same fellow I mentioned earlier. The police raided his lodgings in Camden Town, and there they found nearly all the missing jewels hidden in a false compartment beneath the floorboards. But the blood sapphire was gone." Charles whistled softly. "And Nash never revealed what he did with it?" "Never," said Alfred. "He was tried at the Old Bailey and sentenced to 12 years in Wandsworth Prison. Throughout the entire trial, he remained calm, almost amused. The prosecution was certain he had hidden the diamond somewhere, but they could never find it. Alfred leaned forward, his voice lowering. 3 months into his sentence, Lord Sinclair began to pressure the authorities relentlessly. He wanted his diamond back. Acting on a tip from an informant, a fellow prisoner who claimed to have seen the gem in Nash's possession, Inspector Briggs personally ordered a search of the man's cell. "And?" Charles prompted. "Nothing," Alfred said. "They turned the place upside down. Every brick, every inch of bedding, even the ventilation grates, all examined. Not a trace." Nash simply smiled and told them they were wasting their time. He paused, staring at the rain-blurred window, as if he could still see the faint reflection of that mysterious gem. "Wandsworth is no palace," Alfred murmured, half to himself. "There are precious few places to hide a diamond there. Yet somehow Nash managed it. The police eventually gave up the search, but to this day no one has ever found the blood sapphire, and Nash never spoke a word of where it went." Charles was silent for a long moment, listening to the soft patter of rain and the faint crackle from the hearth. Then he said quietly, "You think he still had it, don't you?" Alfred smiled faintly, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, I'm certain of it. The only question is, where?" For a few minutes, Alfred Morgan sat in silence, lost in thought. Then, almost speaking to himself, he murmured, "Curious problem. Very curious indeed. Where could a prisoner conceal a stone the size of a small nut in a cell, barely large enough for a man to turn around? If I had been investigating that case," he added with a faint smile, "I dare say I might have found it, and earned the reward as well." Charles chuckled softly, but before he could reply, the sound of footsteps echoed on the stairs outside. He sat up, alert. "A client, perhaps," he said. Alfred tilted his head, listening intently. The tread was slow but deliberate, each step firm despite the faint limp in the rhythm. After a few moments, he spoke quietly, almost amused. "An older gentleman," he said, "wearing expensive shoes. You can hear the quality even through the rain. Likely accustomed to traveling by motor car, so he's a man of wealth. And yes, he's limping slightly." Suddenly, his eyes lit with excitement. "Charles, look out of the window. Is there a large black Rolls-Royce parked outside?" Charles crossed to the window and peered down through the rain. "There is," he said in surprise. "A magnificent one." Alfred smiled faintly. "Then I was right. What a remarkable coincidence. The very man we were speaking of, Lord Reginald Sinclair himself." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "Do you know why he's come, Charles?" Charles's expression brightened. "I think I do. I read about it in the papers this morning. His secretary, Harold Rakes, was murdered recently. Perhaps that's what brings him here." Before Alfred could respond, there came a soft but deliberate knock at the door. Alfred rose at once and opened it himself. There stood Lord Reginald Sinclair, a tall, slender man in his early 60s, dressed impeccably in a dark overcoat and gray gloves. Despite the faint limp in his left leg, his bearing was one of quiet dignity. His hair, silvered at the temples, framed a calm, intelligent face that held a certain melancholy grace. Alfred greeted him warmly and with genuine respect. Though he had seen photographs of the man many times in the newspapers, meeting him in person was different. There was no ostentation about him, no air of grandeur, only simple composure and quiet strength. Lord Sinclair smiled as he stepped inside, his voice carrying the faint trace of amusement. "You seem almost to have been expecting me, Mr. Morgan. From your expression, I dare say you guessed my visit." Alfred returned the smile. "I can scarcely believe my good fortune, my lord. When the police failed to solve your secretary's murder, I rather hoped you might call upon me. But please," he gestured toward a chair, "sit down and make yourself comfortable." Lord Sinclair lowered himself into the chair with a soft sigh. "Yes," he said slowly, "it's been nearly a week since the tragedy, and the police have accomplished nothing. So I thought I'd come to you. Mr. Morgan Harold's death was most distressing. He wasn't without his flaws, but I'd grown rather fond of him, and the way he died, it was dreadful." He paused for a moment, his gaze distant. "Of course, Harold was not a saint. You must understand, Mr. Morgan, I have a weakness. I've always tried to reform men who have gone astray. Harold was one such man. But beneath his rough exterior, he was loyal, almost painfully so. I had proof of that on more than one occasion. Alfred leaned forward. "Forgive me, my lord, but I was not aware that your secretary had a troubled past. Was he then involved in criminal activity before entering your service?" Lord Sinclair nodded gravely. "Indeed. According to the police records, Harold Raikes was a convicted felon, a thief and a forger to be precise. He had served several prison terms. The last time he was released, he came directly to me." "I see," said Alfred quietly. "Please, my lord, begin from the start. I've read the reports in the newspapers, but they are so sketchy that no real conclusion can be drawn. Assume I know nothing of the matter and tell me everything that might help me understand the case." Lord Sinclair nodded thoughtfully, took a slow breath, and began his account. "It was about 6 months ago, mid-February, if I recall correctly, when Harold first came to see me. He had been released from Pentonville prison only the previous day. He was honest with me from the start, told me everything about his past, every crime, every sentence. He made no attempt to hide the truth. Then he asked me for a chance to live decently, to start anew." The old man's voice softened. I believed him. There was something in his manner, a quiet desperation perhaps, but also sincerity. So I decided to give him that chance. Alfred nodded, his face calm but attentive. He had heard such beginnings before, the confessions that marked the start of every tragedy outside. The rain still fell steadily, and the muted rumble of the Rolls-Royce engine drifted faintly from the street below. Inside, Alfred Morgan sat motionless, listening with keen attention as the story of Harold Raikes' strange redemption and his even stranger death began to unfold. Lord Reginald's voice softened as he continued, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the rain-smeared window. "I felt genuinely sorry for him," he said quietly. "He wasn't even 40, yet he had been in and out of prison 4 times already. The last time, he was sentenced for theft and forgery. A long sentence, nearly 12 years, I believe. When he came to me, I could see the change in him. There was something deeply repentant in his manner. Not the shallow remorse one often sees in men who've been caught, but something real." He paused, folding his gloved hands together. I asked him what skills he possessed, and he told me he had little education. His youth was spent behind bars after the age of 19. Yet even in prison, he had made use of his time. He learned shorthand and typing, and he promised me, quite solemnly, that if I employed him, he would devote himself to me faithfully for the rest of his life. Lord Sinclair's voice trembled faintly with emotion. My heart softened the moment I met Harold Raikes. I confess I have a weakness for men like him, the broken, the misled. So though I had no need for another stenographer, I gave him a position in my office. He rented a small house nearby. He had no family, no friends, no one in the world. Charles Bennett, listening intently, saw a flicker of pain cross the old man's face. In time, Lord Sinclair went on, I realized Harold was not only competent, but remarkably intelligent. He often did work he wasn't asked to do, and did it better than anyone else could have. Within 2 months, I found myself depending on him completely. I had grown to trust him. He took a deep breath. It was around that time that my old secretary, Mr. Arthur Beecham, passed away. I decided to appoint Harold in his place. My other staff were displeased. They distrusted him, of course. But I ignored their objections. I knew his worth. For the last 4 months, Lord Sinclair continued, Harold Raikes served as my secretary with great efficiency. There were complaints, petty ones, from my employees, but I dismissed them. I knew Harold's past, yes, but I also knew he was a changed man. Poverty had made him a criminal. Redemption had made him loyal. I've always believed that if society offered men like him a fair chance, half our criminals would become good citizens. He paused, the kindness in his voice giving way to grief. But what happened last Tuesday? He shuddered. It was monstrous. He fell silent for a moment, and the only sound was the steady ticking of the clock on Alfred's mantelpiece. Then in a low tone, he continued, I received the news early that morning that Harold Raikes had been murdered. I immediately informed the police and went to his house myself, the scene. He closed his eyes, his voice shaking. He was lying on the floor of his bedroom, the walls, the floor, all splattered with blood. His throat had been cut, savagely, brutally. Even now, the memory of it chills me. His windpipe had been torn apart. I have never seen, nor could I imagine, such beastly violence. For a moment, no one spoke. The room seemed to grow colder. Even Charles Bennet felt a shiver run down his spine at the image the words conjured. At last, Alfred Morgan spoke in his calm, level voice. "Was there no other wound on his body, my lord?" "Yes," Lord Sinclair said hoarsely. "He had been stabbed as well. The doctor told me that the stabbing came first, and that he was already dying when his throat was cut. It was an act of terrible cruelty, Mr. Morgan, as though the killer wished to erase even the memory of life from him." For a while, all three men sat in silence. Lord Sinclair's eyes were fixed on the fire. Charles stared into the carpet. Alfred's gaze had grown distant. Thoughtful Charles, who knew his friend too well, noticed something. The faint narrowing of Alfred's eyes, the half-closed lids, the flicker of sharp intelligence beneath their calm surface. His heart quickened. He had seen that expression many times before. It meant that Alfred Morgan, the unassuming detective who solved crimes others could not, had found something. Lord Sinclair broke the silence at last. "That is all I know, Mr. Morgan," he said quietly. "I wish you to work with the police on this matter. This murderer, this savage creature, cannot be allowed to go free. It is the duty of every decent man to see that justice is done. You will take the case, won't you?" Alfred nodded gravely. "Of course, my lord. I have no quarrel with the police. We shall work together, as always. May I ask, how long was Harold's last sentence in prison?" 14 years, Lord Sinclair replied, "but he was released after 11 for good behavior." Alfred smiled faintly. "That tells us something. And may I ask, my lord, can you recall anything else about Harold Raikes? Anything at all, however small, that might help me understand the kind of man he was?" Lord Sinclair looked puzzled. "What exactly do you wish to know?" Alfred leaned back, steepling his fingers, his eyes half hidden in shadow. "Everything," he said quietly. "Every detail, every habit, every word he spoke in your presence. Sometimes, my lord, the smallest thing, a tone, a gesture, a casual remark, reveals more about a man than all the police reports in the world." And as the clock ticked on and the rain drummed softly against the window, Lord Reginald Sinclair began to remember, and the story of Harold Raikes, the repentant criminal, took on darker and more mysterious shades than any of them could yet imagine. Alfred leaned forward slightly, his tone quiet but deliberate. "Tell me, my lord," and he said, "did you notice anything unusual in Mr. Raikes' behavior in the days before his death?" Lord Sinclair frowned, lost in thought. "Yes," he said after a pause. 3 or 4 days before his death, something peculiar happened. Harold was working near me one morning. He had been sorting through correspondence when he suddenly turned pale and looked terribly ill. It wasn't mere sickness, Mr. Morgan. It was fear. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. Was anyone else present in the room at the time?" Alfred asked. The nobleman hesitated, knitting his brows as he tried to recall. "Let me think. Ah, yes. I was reviewing a list of applications from men seeking alms and assistance. There was one petitioner present that morning. He had brought a letter of recommendation from the local vicar. Harold was working quietly in the same room when this man arrived." Alfred's gaze sharpened. "So Harold Raikes fell ill, in the presence of that petitioner?" "Yes," Lord Sinclair replied slowly. "The man had only been in the room a few minutes when Harold suddenly dropped his pen, clutched his chest, and turned white as paper. I remember asking him what was wrong, but he only mumbled something and asked to be excused. I thought perhaps he was unwell, but now that I think of it, he looked terrified." A long silence followed. Alfred's eyes were half closed again, that same expression that made Charles Bennet's pulse quicken. Then Alfred said quietly, "Can you recall anything else? Anything that seemed odd, however insignificant?" Lord Sinclair was silent for a while, then nodded. "Yes, a small incident. I don't know if it's relevant, but it struck me at the time. You may recall that several years ago, a rare blue diamond was stolen from my collection. I do indeed remember that, my lord, Alfred replied. You must also know, continued Lord Sinclair, that I offered a substantial reward to anyone who could return it. I remember reading that in the papers, said Alfred, though I was unaware whether the reward still stood. Lord Sinclair leaned back, his voice lowering. That was precisely the question Harold asked me when he first came to work as my typist. I was surprised because by then I had long given up hope of ever recovering the diamond. I told him that yes, the reward still stood. I said that if the stone were ever returned to me, the finder would be well rewarded. At that, Alfred Morgan suddenly sprang to his feet, his eyes gleaming with sudden intensity. If I were to ask you the same question, my lord, he said sharply, would your answer be the same? Lord Sinclair looked startled. Yes, of course, but Alfred cut him off gently, his voice calm once more. Would you like to know the name of Harold Rakes' murderer? Lord Sinclair froze. I beg your pardon. You mean you already know who killed him? I know the name, Alfred said quietly. It is not my duty to collect evidence. That is for the police. But I will tell you his name. The police may then search his home and confirm the proof. I do not believe it will be difficult to find. The old nobleman stared in astonishment. This sounds like wizardry, Mr. Morgan. You truly know the killer's name? I am assuming, Alfred replied softly, but I have learned to trust my assumptions. The murderer's name is Raymond Nash. Raymond Nash, Lord Sinclair repeated slowly. The name rings a bell. It should, Alfred said. 10 years ago, he was the man who stole your blue diamond. He has only just been released from prison. Recognition dawned in Lord Sinclair's face. Good heavens, yes. But why would he kill Harold Rakes? What connection could there be between them? There is indeed a connection, Alfred said, one that can be confirmed in the prison archives. Their records will tell us everything. He glanced at the clock on the mantel. But it is nearly 11. I shall not detain you further, my lord. If you return here at 4 this afternoon, I promise that everything will be made clear. You may even recover your blue diamond. Lord Sinclair rose, bewildered but trusting. I shall be here, he said simply, and with that, he took his leave, descending the stairs with his measured, limping gait. As the door closed behind him, Alfred began to prepare for an outing. Charles asked, Where are you off to at this hour, Alfred? It's pouring outside. Alfred was fastening his raincoat, his umbrella in hand. There are old records in the prison office that need to be reviewed, he said briskly, and a few other errands as well. Don't wait lunch for me, Charles. If time permits, I'll eat somewhere along the way. Without another word, he stepped out into the heavy rain, his tall figure disappearing into the misty street below, leaving Charles Bennet staring after him, burning with curiosity about what clue his friend had uncovered. This time, Alfred Morgan returned at precisely 3 in the afternoon. He looked exhausted, his raincoat glistening with droplets, but there was a spark of triumph in his eyes as he removed his damp shoes by the door. He said briskly, I'm famished. Haven't eaten a thing since morning. I'll have a quick bath. Thomas, be a good man and prepare something hot. At 4 o'clock sharp, the matinee show begins. Charles Bennet, who had been pacing the sitting room impatiently, stopped short. What show? Where on earth? Alfred gave him one of his enigmatic smiles. Don't worry, Charles. The show will be held right here, in this very room. Please set out a few more chairs for our guests. He disappeared into the bathroom, humming under his breath, while Charles, still baffled, began arranging the furniture. When Alfred emerged, clean, refreshed, and sharp as ever, he devoured his late lunch with remarkable speed. Between bites of omelet and toast, Charles seized the opportunity. What did you do all day? He asked eagerly. Alfred chewed thoughtfully, then said, I visited an old friend in the prison department, spent most of the morning going through the records. And, as it turns out, my assumption was absolutely correct. What assumption? Charles pressed. Leaning forward, Alfred ignored the question entirely, continuing in his calm, conversational tone. After leaving there, I went straight to Inspector Bernard Bishop. You might recall he's in charge of the district where Harold Rakes was murdered, I also met Superintendent Paul Norton, who's heading the case. I explained everything to him. Then I buttered up Bernard quite thoroughly, which I must say was not easy, to get what I needed. Charles threw up his hands. And what, pray tell, was that? Alfred smiled thinly. 2 things. First, to locate Raymond Nash's present address. Second, to have him arrested and his home searched. Charles leaned closer. And, did you find anything? It wasn't difficult to find where he lives, Alfred said, reaching for his tea. But the search was disappointing. They found nothing of significance, except for a very large, very sharp knife. It's been sent to the forensics lab to test for traces of blood. What I hoped to find, however, was not there. The man's talent for concealment is truly extraordinary. What thing were you hoping to find? Alfred's eyes gleamed. The blue diamond, of course, Lord Sinclair's missing gem. Charles stared at him. Then what now? Alfred leaned back in his chair, his voice quiet but firm. Now comes the performance. A little acting, if you will. I intend to strike directly at the root of Raymond's superstition. Let's see if fear makes him talk. Ah! And speak of the devil, Lord Sinclair has just arrived. The others will follow soon. The others? Charles asked, confused. Raymond Nash and his custodians, Alfred replied with a faint smile. What? They're bringing him here? Yes, said Alfred simply, rising to his feet. That's the arrangement I made with Inspector Bishop. Thomas, clear these dishes, please. Charles barely had time to process any of this before the doorbell rang. The clock on the mantel struck 4. As expected, Lord Reginald Sinclair entered. Punctual and composed, his gray suit immaculate despite the drizzle outside, Alfred greeted him warmly and showed him to a seat by the window. Moments later came the sound of heavy boots and official voices in the hall. Then Inspector Bishop, Superintendent Norton, 2 constables, and Raymond Nash entered the room. Charles studied Raymond closely. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance, which Alfred often said was the perfect disguise for a criminal. The man's hair was cropped short, his forehead narrow, his chin sharp, and his eyes constantly shifting. He wore a shabby, multicolored leather sporting coat that had probably seen better days long before his prison term. His trousers were creased, and his enormous rubber boots squelched slightly on the floor. He looked more like a farmhand than a notorious jewel thief. Alfred turned to Lord Sinclair. Do you recognize him, my lord? Lord Sinclair squinted. Yes, he's the very man who came to me asking for alms that morning, the day Harold fell ill. Excellent, Alfred said softly. Gentlemen, please take your seats, Inspector Bishop, if you would be so kind as to sit beside Lord Sinclair. Mr. Niles, this chair here, please. Raymond obeyed silently, his jaw set. The 2 constables positioned themselves on either side of him. Inspector Bishop adjusted his collar, visibly irritated by the unorthodox proceedings. He clearly found the whole situation rather beneath official dignity. Superintendent Norton, meanwhile, folded his arms, trying to appear both detached and attentive. When everyone was settled, Alfred Morgan took his place behind the small writing table in the center of the room. His voice, calm and deliberate, filled the space. Gentlemen, he began, I am about to tell you a story. It is not one of those fanciful tales my friend Mr. Bennett writes for the magazines, but a true story, as real and as grim as the man sitting before you. I shall tell it as faithfully as I can. If I happen to err, Mr. Raymond Nash here will no doubt correct me. Only 2 men knew the full story, and one of them, he added, glancing briefly at Lord Sinclair, is dead. The room fell completely silent. Rain tapped steadily against the window panes. Raymond Nash shifted uneasily in his chair, his boots squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Alfred's gaze swept slowly across the faces before him. The nobleman, the police, the thief, before resting finally on Charles Bennett. Then in his quiet, even voice, Alfred began the tale that would unravel the mystery of the deadly diamond. After this brief but chilling introduction, Alfred Morgan began his story. Raymond Nash sat motionless, his eyes fixed somewhere on the table. His face bore no expression, neither guilt nor fear. Only his fingers moved, tracing invisible shapes across the polished wood as though trying to distract himself from what was coming. Alfred spoke slowly, his tone even and deliberate. "I shall begin my account from the time Raymond Nash was sent to prison. Though he was locked away, he did not part with Lord Sinclair's blue diamond. How he managed this is unknown to me, and in truth, it matters little to the story I'm about to tell. Raymond himself may choose to explain, if he wishes." For a moment, Raymond lifted his gaze, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes, and then went back to tracing lines on the table, the rhythm of his fingers steady and unnerving. Alfred continued. Raymond had stolen several precious stones, most of which were recovered by the police, all except the blue diamond, that one he kept with him always. Perhaps it was the stone's strange magnetism, or perhaps its sheer beauty. Imagine it, a blue diamond with a thin red streak running through its heart, as though the stone itself bled light. Raymond believed it to be lucky. But he did not know, gentlemen, that such stones can be double-edged. Fortunate for some, fatal for others. And when misfortune dogs a man's path, it often blinds his reason. The inspector shifted in his chair. Raymond's fingers still moved. Now, Alfred went on, Raymond was confined in Albury prison. Some months passed. Then, through whispers and informants, the authorities learned that the diamond was still with him. His cell was searched. Thoroughly, he had one companion there, another inmate, and both men were examined. Yet the diamond was nowhere to be found. He paused, letting the silence grow heavy. The second prisoner was Harold Raikes, he said, an old criminal, a man who had spent most of his life behind bars. He knew the hidden trades of that dark world, and some of its more grotesque arts. Charles Bennet leaned forward, frowning. Alfred looked briefly at him before continuing. Those who work with hardened criminals know that some of them develop a curious skill, the ability to create a sort of pouch within their throats. Strange but true. You see, money is forbidden in prison, yet these men, many of them addicts or gamblers, must bribe the wardens to obtain their vices, so they conceal coins or even small trinkets in these pockets. A secret only a few officers are aware of. Lord Sinclair's eyes widened slightly. Alfred's voice dropped lower. Harold Raikes had such a pouch. When Raymond Nash became his cellmate, the two grew friendly. Raymond, trusting him, learned of the man's strange talent. One day word came that the prison would be raided. A surprise search. There was nowhere to hide the diamond. In desperation, Raymond turned to Harry and entrusted him with it. He begged him to conceal it in his throat. Harold was fascinated by the gem, that deep blue core, the red vein glowing like a pulse. He swallowed it instantly. When the guards searched the cell, nothing was found. Raymond's jaw tightened, but his gaze never lifted. The very next morning, Alfred said softly, Harold Raikes was transferred to another prison. According to the records, it was a routine relocation, but Harry saw it as fate's blessing, a chance to betray his friend. He kept the diamond. Raymond could not complain to anyone, of course. What thief can cry for a theft against him? And so, from that day forward, he carried one thought within him: revenge. The room was utterly silent. Only the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel filled the pause. Alfred's eyes flicked to Raymond. The man's face remained blank, but a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. 10 years passed, Alfred resumed. When Harold Raikes was finally released, he decided to return the diamond to its rightful owner. He came straight to Lord Sinclair, not out of honesty, but calculation. He knew he could not sell the diamond without raising suspicion. It was too famous, too unique. So he planned to befriend Lord Sinclair, win his trust, and then return the gem in exchange for a reward. Lord Sinclair nodded faintly, as if recalling those days. But, Alfred said, my lord's generosity worked its strange magic. Harold Raikes, who had known only deceit and cruelty, found himself unable to betray such kindness. The man who had spent his life cheating others was suddenly shamed by a gentleman's grace. He spoke once of a gem, but afterward could not bring himself to hand it over. It is remarkable, gentlemen, how a touch of humanity can awaken guilt in even the blackest heart. Raymond's fingers stopped moving. His hands were clenched now. But fate, Alfred said in a voice just above a whisper, had already drawn its circle. For only days later, Raymond Nash was released from prison as well. He did not know where Harold was, but as destiny would have it, within 4 days he saw him again. And where, of all places? In Lord Sinclair's own drawing room. The Maharaja's, no, Lord Sinclair's, face went pale. Yes, Alfred said. It was after seeing Raymond that Harry fell ill. A sudden sickness. No known cause. None except perhaps the shock of seeing the man he had wronged. For 10 long years, the fire of revenge had smoldered in Raymond's heart. And now that flame burst into life. He paused, his voice darkening. It was not difficult for Raymond to discover where Harold lived. He watched, he waited, and on that fateful night, Alfred's voice trailed off. The room seemed to hold its breath. Raymond's head had bowed slightly. His eyes glowed crimson in the lamplight. His forehead gleaming with sweat. Charles Bennet swallowed hard. And on that night, he whispered. Alfred turned toward him, his tone measured, cold and final. On that night, the blue diamond returned to its master, but through blood. Until this moment, Alfred Morgan had been addressing all of us. Then, with the suddenness of a striking hawk, he turned toward Raymond Nash. Raymond's face was pale, his eyes fixed on Alfred, unblinking, venomous, cold. It was the stare of a serpent preparing to strike. Alfred raised his hand, pointing directly at him. His voice, low and magnetic, cut through the heavy silence like a blade. Raymond, he said, that night, you ripped apart Harold Rakes's throat, searching for the blue diamond. Where is it now? For a moment, it seemed as if the very air in the room stopped moving. Raymond could not tear his gaze away from Alfred's eyes that gleamed with a strange, compelling force. His lips quivered. He licked them nervously, tried to rise, then sank back into his chair, gasping. His voice came out cracked, barely human. I don't know. I don't know anything. I never killed him. I don't even know this man, this Harry. I swear it. I don't have the diamond. He crossed his arms over his chest, clutching himself as if to hold something within, and glared at Alfred with red, defiant eyes. But Alfred did not move. His hand still pointed toward Raymond, like the judgment of a silent court. The tension in the room was unbearable. A battle of invisible forces. Two wills were locked in deadly combat. Even Bennet and Lord Sinclair seemed to hold their breath, spellbound. Then Alfred spoke again, his voice lower now, but terrible in its calm. Raymond, he said, leaning forward, you do not understand the curse that clings to this diamond. That is why it still enslaves you. Think, until the day you stole it, no man could ever catch you. But the moment you laid your hand on it, your fate was sealed. You were thrown into prison. And think again of Harold Rakes. He hid the diamond in his throat. And what became of him? You, of all men, know the answer. Raymond's face twitched violently. Alfred's words struck him like hammer blows. That gem, Alfred went on, is no diamond. It is venom. Venom from a serpent's fang. Whoever keeps it courts death. Wear it on your hand, and your wrist will be chained. Wear it around your neck, and it will tighten into a noose. Mark my words, Raymond. That cursed stone will one day hang you on the gallows. The words seemed to pierce something deep within the man. Raymond's body stiffened. A low guttural sound escaped his throat. Then, like a man possessed, he sprang to his feet. No one moved. He stood there trembling, eyes wild with terror, glancing about as though searching for a way to escape the curse that clung to him. Suddenly, with a strangled cry, he tore a button from his old leather coat and flung it across the room. I don't want it, he screamed. I don't want it. Take it away. Take your cursed diamond away from me. Let me live. Only let me live. He staggered forward, gasping, then collapsed heavily to the floor, senseless. The silence that followed was dreadful. You could hear only the sound of the rain against the window and the ticking of the clock. Alfred stood still for a long moment, breathing hard. His face glistened with sweat, his hands still trembling. Slowly he wiped his brow and bent to pick up the object that had rolled near the table leg, the button torn from Raymond's coat. Carefully, almost reverently, he peeled back the worn leather covering. Something flashed beneath. A glint of deep blue fire streaked with red. Alfred's voice, though trembling, was steady enough to fill the room. "Lord Sinclair," he said quietly, holding up the gem, "here is your diamond. Don't forget to stay tuned. We'll be back soon with another gripping and mysterious case of Alfred Morgan that'll keep you hooked till the very end. If you enjoyed the story, share it with fellow mystery lovers, and subscribe for more adventures with the truth seeker himself.